For a brief time at the end of the 1950s, several of the low-budget independent companies would put together two pictures for the price of one. I did two science fiction horror films for Allied artists. Each film had a 10-day shooting schedule with a budget of about $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. I was a fairly young filmmaker. I had just turned 30, and I was learning on the job. I never went to film school. I have a degree in engineering, which may or may not have helped me make films. It may have been my engineering background, but I was always interested in science fiction. And I also knew that science fiction was very popular, and it was one of the few genres that you did not need names for. Almost every film, other than science fiction or horror, you needed some sort of big star or television star or lower budget name to put on the film. But when I was doing science fiction and horror, I could just hire the best actors available for the budget area in which I was working. The reason I chose black and white over color was very simple. It was cheaper. One of my first films, which I produced but didn't direct, was called It Stalked the Ocean Floor, and it was a big success. So I was looking for another sea creature kind of picture, and I came up with two titles: Attack of the Crab Monsters and Attack of the Lobster Monsters. And I asked my assistant which one she thought was best. Her answer was, "I like lobsters. I don't think it should be lobsters." So it became Attack of the Crab Monsters. I made Attack of the Crab Monsters in 1957. It was the third or fourth picture I had directed. I started in 1956. Charles Griffith, Chuck Griffith, was a very good friend of mine and a very good young writer. He wrote both Not of This Earth and Attack of the Crab Monsters, went on to co-write Death Race 2000, and I don't know how many other pictures we worked on together. The leads in Attack of the Crab Monsters were Richard Garland, Pamela Duncan, and Russell Johnson. All of them went on to have rather good careers, not becoming stars, but having good, solid working careers. Russell Johnson, of course, starred in Gilligan's Island and emerged as sort of the top graduate of that cast. The editor was Chuck Gross. He had the two abilities I was looking for. He was a very good editor, and he was a very efficient, fast-moving editor. Surprisingly enough, he went on to become a composer and actually had a bigger career as a composer than he did as an editor. The score for Attack of the Crab Monsters was done by Ronnie Stein, who had done several scores for me before and went on to do, I don't know, at least 10 or 12 pictures afterwards. He was a young man out of, I think, some music school in New York, and once more had a solid, good career in Hollywood. The cinematographer on Attack of the Crab Monsters was Floyd Crosby, with whom I was fortunate enough to make at least 15 films. Floyd was a brilliant cinematographer. He had won an Academy Award, I think maybe the first one given, for cinematography on Taboo, a picture he shot in the South Pacific. He also did High Noon, one of the greatest westerns of all time, and unfortunately for him, but fortunately for me, he had some problems with the Un-American Activities Committee. He was never blacklisted, he was never a communist or anything like that, but he knew a lot of people, and some studios wouldn't hire him. So he had a strange career where a number of people like Stanley Kramer and other great directors, Fred Zinnemann and others, hired Floyd, but then he would have periods when he wasn't working because some people were afraid to work with him, and during those periods, whenever he was available, he and I worked together. The concept for Not of This Earth as Attack of the Crab Monsters, and with almost every film I've made, came from me. Generally, the pictures were my original idea, but I did not write the screenplay. I would write a 2, 3, 4, 5-page treatment or synopsis and then give that to the screenwriter and work with him, which really meant he was doing the writing, but I was doing editing and corrections as we went along. Chuck Griffith did one of his best jobs, I think, on Not of This Earth. It was the most successful of the pictures we did at that time. Chuck co-wrote the film with Mark Hanna. They collaborated on 3 or 4 films together. They were both very good, and then they went their separate ways. Amiably, it's just that he felt they should have their own career, and they did have good careers. The leading man in Not of This Earth was Paul Birch, who was also the original Marlboro Man. I shot the picture in 10 days, and unfortunately Paul became ill after the 9th day and was unable to work the final day. And the final day, because of the quirks of the schedule, we were actually shooting the beginning of the film. So the only thing I could think of was to get somebody who had roughly the same size and build as Paul and shoot him in such a way that we never saw him clearly. He was always in shadow. It was dark movements across the screen, and I remember several film critics commented about how good the opening of the picture was because I set everything up with interesting psychological dark shadows. The leading lady in Not of This Earth was my favorite leading lady, Beverly Garland, with whom I did a number of pictures. I always felt that Beverly was a brilliant actress. She was actually the first woman to play a lead, not just the second lead, but to be the lead in a TV series. I think it was called Decoy, and she played a police lieutenant in New York. It was a very successful series, and she went on to be in a number of other series. She had as close to a full stardom kind of career as you can have. She would be considered what we call a name, almost a star. I thought she should have been a star. Morgan Jones played the young leading man who, as I recall, was a motorcycle policeman. Morgan worked with me in several pictures. He was very good. He went on to be in Forbidden Planet and a number of other rather large films. I remember War of the Satellites very well. It was 1958, and I had seen on television one day that the Russians had put the first man in space. I was in Steve Broidy's office at 9 o'clock. He was the president of Allied Artists at that time. And I said, Steve, if you can give me $70,000, I have a title, War of the Satellites. I can have it ready to be in theaters in 7 weeks from today. And he said, what's the storyline? And I said, I have no idea what the storyline is. Just know it'll be War of the Satellites and it'll be ready in 7 weeks. He said, fine, you've got the money. Chuck Griffith wrote the script. I borrowed somebody's phone at Allied Artists after my meeting with Steve Broidy and called Chuck and said, come over to my house right away. We've got to start today on a script, and I need this script in a week and a half. He said, fine, I'll be there. Driving back to my house, I came up with a vague idea. Chuck was there to meet me. We fleshed out the storyline, and then what we did, at the same time, we wrote down a list of the sets. Chuck wrote the script in a week and a half, and we started building the sets before we had the script, because the script, of course, followed the line of the sets we had built. So it took me a week and a half of pre-production and Chuck to write the script. I shot the picture in 7 or 8 days, and I cut it in a few weeks. I had 2 editors. One editor started the second day of shooting, cutting the first day of shooting. The other editor started the third day of shooting, cutting the second day of shooting, and they kept on alternating to make the film. After my meeting with Chuck Griffith, I immediately called Jack Rabin and Irvin Block, who was called Blocky, and said, we've got this general idea. I need somebody for special effects. Do you want to come in? They came in. They added a few things to the script that would help it from a special effects standpoint, so I think they may have shared writing credit. I'm not even certain. And they may have gotten co-producer or something like that, because I didn't have that much money, and they finally said, okay, we'll do it for that much money, but we want a producer credit because it will help us on future films. The DP on the picture was Floyd Crosby, who'd worked with me on many pictures before, and again, he was probably the best cinematographer I ever worked with. The leads in the picture were Dick Devon and Susan Cabot. Both of them worked with me on a number of pictures. I first saw Dick on a television show where he played the bad guy, and I thought he was great, and I looked for the credits at the end of it and just wrote his name down. Susan I had met in New York when I was doing some casting there. She was a member of the Actors Studio and had appeared in a number of Broadway productions. I actually played a small role in the picture, being some sort of a ground control official or something. I knew nothing about acting, but the Screen Actors Guild at that time had a rule that an actor was paid from the first day of work to the last day of work. And there's always some little role. You schedule your leads to have them work the shortest period of time, but there's always some little role. Because of the schedule, he works the first day of the picture and the last day of the picture, and you have to pay him for the entire length. I used to play that role myself for obvious reasons. Dick Miller was also in the film. He had done several films with me before and went on to be a regular, almost contract actor. I have no idea how many films we did together, but it has to be over 20 pictures.
It was a typical Corman production. It was a low budget, fast paced. We did one take and that was it. Tried to do one take and that was it. We very rarely did a second take unless the camera fell over.